The collarette and the nutritive zone. This chapter is most important for helping us to understand the collarette, which is a major circular sign and landmark in the iris. The collarette has been called the autonomic nerve wreath, iris frill, and small arterial circle. It is made up of arteries and is intertwined with nerves from the autonomic nervous system, including the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. It is usually located about 1/3 the way out from the pupil and borders zone number 2. Since the collarette borders the area that represents the intestinal tract and the absorption of nutrients, it can tell us a great deal about bowel behavior and digestive ability. The collarette can be placed differently in various people. The placement of the collarette, its quality, and various shapes of the collarette will influence the autonomic nervous system and bowel behavior. We will also study the stomach zone, or zone number 1, and the intestinal zone number 2. Finally, we will review the size of the pupil with respect to the proximity of the collarette and how this affects a person's energy levels and digestive ability. Now we're going to discuss the placement of the collarette. The collarette, as we know, is located around the pupil. And we have 3 areas of placement. One is balanced normal wreath, one is constricted tight wreath, one is atonic floppy distended wreath. The balanced collarette. The balanced collarette is about 1/3 the way out from the pupil. It has no negative influence on bowel behavior. The constricted tight collarette is very close to the pupil, as we can see here. This collarette is close to the pupil. We often see it in neurogenic types. They have a potential for bowel strictures or tight, narrowed areas in the colon. This may cause a tendency for constipation. These people tend to be introverted and they hold in their feelings. The atonic distended collarette is a collarette that is floppy, it comes far out from the pupil, and it lacks tone. It's a large collarette, usually in a polyglandular or connective tissue subtype, and these people have tendencies for the following. The intestinal tract may lack tone, poor peristalsis, slow mobility, constipation, poor absorption of nutrients, parasites, yeast, fungus, bacteria. They often are extroverted, outgoing individuals. Next, we're going to discuss the quality of the collarette. We're going to review the thick and ropey collarette wreath, the thin and wispy collarette wreath, and the absent, not visible collarette wreath. Now I want to discuss the thick and ropey collarette. The wreath is thick, and that produces extra energy and extra motility. They tend to have an overactive nervous system with extra strength and energy in their bodies. Excessive intestinal energy that may cause diarrhea, colic, spasms, cramping. We want to examine the organ areas in the iris just outside the thicker part. For example, this area here that's quite thick, and we can see a lacuna just outside there. But where the parts are thicker, the organ areas just adjacent are going to receive extra energy, and adjacent to the heart area, that could cause extra heart palpitations. The thin and wispy collarette. This is a collarette that's very thin. It looks very wispy, as in this eye. And these people lack nerve energy. They lack stamina. They're often timid and shy. They have a very sensitive nervous system and a very sensitive digestive system. They may have poor peristalsis and constipation because they can't push their food through. The absent collarette. This is where we see no collarette at all, and in this case we don't see a collarette. We see the sphincter muscle showing through, but no collarette. So when the collarette is so thin, or it appears absent, or it is covered by pigmentation, whenever it appears absent, these people have a tendency for a very sensitive nervous system. They lack stamina, they lack nerve energy, they're very anxious people, shy people. They have a tendency for stomach aches and stomach spasms. They have poor peristalsis, which can cause constipation. The shape of the collarette. We're going to review now the 3 possible shapes of the collarette. One is jagged or star-shaped, one is double collarette wreath, and one is intermittent collarette wreath. Here we see a jagged star-shaped wreath, very jagged in this iris. These people have a tendency for a spastic colon, digestive irritability, strictures or tightenings in their colon, inflammation in the intestinal tract, compromised nerve energy at the jagged points. Look at the iris areas just adjacent. So for example here, in the right iris where it's jagged, adjacent to the heart area. Think of a hose that's been pinched off, pinching off energy. So that could be a blockage of energy to the heart area. The double collarette. We will see a collarette at times that will have doubling in areas, almost like 2 collarettes. These people have a tendency for too much energy. Think of 2 live wires beside of each other. Nervous stomach, possible abdominal spasms, feelings of anxiety, tendency for diarrhea because of extra energy in their stomach, blood sugar imbalances. You want to examine the areas in the iris just adjacent to where the collarette doubles, because there's going to be extra energy in those areas where the collarette is doubling. The intermittent collarette. This is a collarette that's broken. It's intermittent. It breaks in specific areas. In this iris where the contraction furrows cut through, it's breaking. And in areas where we don't see it, it's breaking. So when the collarette is intermittent, they have a tendency for abdominal spasms, lack of enzymes, poor absorption of nutrients. They may have fatigue, lack of nerve energy, weak peristalsis, and constipation. You want to examine the organ areas just outside the breaks in the collarette, because there will be a lack of energy in those organ areas. Now we're going to talk about other types of collarette wreaths. The square collarette. It looks square. Think about where the square points go to at 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 8 o'clock. The square collarette shows me tendencies for blood sugar imbalances because the squares are in the areas of the pancreas reaction fields. They tend to have hypoglycemia, diabetes, concerns for blood sugar. They also tend to have weak immune systems. When the body is not processing sugar properly, excess sugar will feed bacteria, and that will cause weakened immunity. The collarette with a frontal indentation where it goes down here. These people have a tendency for prolapsus of the transverse colon. Notice I said tendency. They tend to have pressure on the genitourinary organs, bloating, gas, cramping, poor peristalsis, possible acid reflux, and poor concentration, because the collarette is dropped and there's a tendency if the colon presses on the organ areas below. The meerschaum wreath is very amazing. It's white over the entire wreath. The wreath is always close to the collarette and always covered with extremely white fibers. The word meerschaum in German means white sea foam. And this sign was studied by German iridologists. And this sign means nervousness and anxiety, a tendency for stomach spasms and cramping, and ulcers are sometimes common. V-line and parallel tracks in the collarette are actually a double collarette with V-line parallel tracks. And in these people, with this double jagged collarette. They tend to have an irritable nervous system, spastic conditions that cause cramping in the gut and in the body, anxiety, possibly panic attacks, tendency for inflammation in the mucous membranes in the intestinal tract. Pay attention to the organ areas just adjacent to the peaks, where they peak out and where they peak in. There's a compromise in nerve energy there. The angle of Fuchs' collarette is very interesting. It's a raised and ropey, thick collarette. It looks like a mountain range. And it can cause a tendency for fermentation and flatulence, cramping, endocrine gland disturbances, which would cause hormonal imbalances, blood sugar highs and lows. These people tend to push themselves really hard and then crash from exhaustion. Now we're going to discuss digestive signs of the nutritive zone. The gray inner pupillary border. When we see the border really gray just around the pupil, and we're talking about just around the pupil, very, very gray, just inside there. That gray inner pupillary border, it's dark gray, that shows a deficiency in enzymes and problems with poor absorption. And where the sphincter muscle shows through here, that also shows us a tendency for poor digestion, lack of enzymes, lack of density in that area is what causes the sphincter muscle to show through. The gray inner iris border is caused from the lack of fiber structure covering that area. Digestive signs of the nutritive zone. When we see thin fibers in the stroma of zones 1 and 2, very thin fibers, that means we can see the sphincter muscle showing through. That shows a poor digestive ability. And when we see separated fibers, where the fibers are really separated, remember density equals resistance and resilience, so these people do not have as strong of a digestive tract as if the fibers were tight. The very white stomach zone shows overactivity, possible extra acid in the stomach, possible ulcers, and problems with acid reflux. The gray stomach zone, where it's grayer than the rest of the iris, can mean a lack of digestive enzymes, a lack of hydrochloric acid, and poor ability to digest and absorb nutrients. The central heterochromia means to pay attention to the digestive tract, ask questions about the digestion. They tend to have constipation and problems with absorption and digestion. Collarette crypts are crypts just inside the collarette, and these show a familial history of bowel disorders and problems with the digestive tract. Comb teeth are short radial furrows inside the nutritive zone. We call them comb teeth or wagon wheel spokes. They look like little tiny wagon wheel spokes going around the pupil. And these are showing a deficiency, lack of tightness in the structure. Short radial furrows mean a lack of nerve energy in the digestive tract. Radial furrows coming out from the digestive tract and all the way through the collarette and outward. That shows a lack of nerve energy in those areas where toxins can't get out or nutrients in, a possible tendency for parasites. Here we see a collarette, and inside the collarette we see a contraction furrow. When we see contraction furrows inside the nutritive zone, that shows a lack of minerals, problems with cramping. These people are people that get stomach aches often, tendency for cramping in the stomach area. Now we're going to discuss analyzing the collarette and pupil for vital energy levels and digestive ability. So we have several patterns here. The first one is the large pupil and the small collarette. And as we can see, the collarette is very close to the pupil, and the pupil is quite large. So we're going to talk about vital energy levels and digestive abilities of this person. They tend to have a nutritive zone that is small, so there is small digestive ability. Therefore, they have low energy, low stamina, and they need a lot of rest. The ciliary zone out here is large, so formation of energy is large, but they use it up quickly. They have a small amount of energy reserve. They desire large amounts of food, but digestion and absorption ability tends to be poor. They also tend to have stomach cramping. The very large pupil and the large collarette, these people tend to eat large quantities of food. They use lots of energy, but productive for short periods of time. They gather large amounts of metabolic waste because there's such a large area in the digestive zone. The small ciliary zone out here shows the formation of energy is small and the energy reserves are low. The metabolic rate is sluggish, so very little of the food is utilized properly. They have a tendency for flatulence. The next combination is the very small pupil and the small, tight collarette. Their genetic tendencies are that they metabolize food quite well, they store energy well, they have great stamina. The ciliary zone is wide, so they are able to store a great deal of energy. They may utilize large amounts of energy and build up very little waste. So of all the combinations, this is the better combination. The next combination is the small pupil and the large collarette. These people have certain tendencies. They are very often hungry, they may eat a lot, they have poor energy, they're cold, they're slow, they lack vitality. The narrow ciliary zone causes lowered metabolism and small energy utilization. They seem to want lots of food, but with poor metabolism, they produce a great deal of waste.